Condemned to Freedom, An Atheist Strolls Through Eden by D.A. Wood, from the August-September 2025 issue of Free Inquiry. Only one interdiction can be found in both creation stories of Genesis, namely, the command of Yahweh to Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall die. Genesis 2, verse 17. Having no knowledge concerning good and evil, nor yet the faintest notion of shame or guilt, Adam and Eve are in no sense moral agents. Even peremptory gratitude would have exceeded their capacities. Living among plants and animals, they are neither good by nature, a la certain anarchist doctrines, nor evil by nature, as many counter-revolutionary ideologies would have it. Though political, Edenic existence is at first wholly immoral. Just as we do not assign moral attributes to animals, so too, at this stage of human existence, we cannot assign moral attributes to Adam and Eve. Along comes a serpent that is craftier, Arum, than the other animals. He suggests that Eve taste the taboo fruit, saying that she will not die but rather have her eyes opened and be like her creator. The dilemma she faces runs as follows. Eve can 1. Obey the first command, refraining from eating of the tree and live, or 2. Obey the second suggestion, eating of the tree and risking life and limb, and live with a new, divine knowledge. The only way to find out which path is better is to test them. Aren't all children faced with such dilemmas every day? Aren't they likely to be tantalized by risk and reward and put off by a threatening command? Interestingly, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is not the only specialized tree in Eden. There is also the tree of life, which confers immortality, Genesis 2 verse 9 and 3 verse 22. Either Adam and Eve weren't intelligent enough to eat from the tree of life first, thereby allowing them to taste the other tree's fruit without any mortal consequences, or it is the very act of risking one's own life that increases the allure of the serpent's counsel. This second possibility would fit well with the idea that eating of the trees threatens divine sovereignty, provided that, as George Bataille maintains, sovereignty is essentially the refusal to accept the limits that the fear of death would have us respect. We know what happens next. Eve and Adam share some of the fruit. To play with a literal reading of the myth, which is always to play with fire, one thing is certain, they didn't eat very much of it. Adam and Eve bequeathed to humanity no substantial knowledge of good and evil, but only fallible and incommensurable priorities, predilections, and prejudices. Having eaten at most a bite or two proved much worse than remaining in innocent ignorance. Few humans have a stomach for ethics at all. Perhaps if Adam and Eve had consumed the entirety of the tree, root and branches, their progeny would have been better off. Unfortunately, wishful theological thinking has distorted one of the myth's simple, preliminary facts. Adam and Eve's alleged sin does not and literally cannot constitute a moral transgression. They only become capable of morality because of their decision. Ironically, it is the serpent, not Yahweh, who speaks truly early on. Adam and Eve do not die in the day that they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Instead, shame at their own nakedness, arumim, contaminates them. The immediate partial knowledge of good and evil is shame, the tale suggests, a species of sadness greatly exacerbated by Yahweh's additional verbal and physical punishments. That morality is grounded in shame, a thesis arguably advanced by David Hume, Vladimir Solovyov, and Emmanuel Levinas, remains interesting in its own right. Because piety is generally considered no laughing matter, most overlook the hilarity of these scenes. Rather than slither off with a branch of immortality for himself like the snake in the Sumerian epic Gilgamesh, the serpent of biblical myth gives rise to creation's first dose of comedy. He introduces humor into the world by cognitively pantsing a pair of bipeds. Imagine a naked actor entering stage right, carrying on with their day-to-day affairs, turning, stretching, and yawning as they ought not, only to find out mid-scene that they are in fact naked. Only prudes could overlook the comedy in this. Arthur Miller, by contrast, wonderfully captures the appropriately childish humor surrounding the fabled firstborn. Lucifer. Now listen carefully, because this is fairly deep, and I may have to leave any minute. You know by now why the Lord put you in this lovely garden. Adam, to praise everything. Lucifer, right? Now what if I told you that there are a number of things you've been leaving out? Adam, shocked. Oh no, I praise absolutely everything. Lucifer, pointing to his penis. And what about this thing here? Do you praise him for that? Adam, looking down at himself. Well, not in particular, but I include it in Lucifer. But how can you when you don't know what it's for? Eve, he pees that way. Lucifer, pees. That is so incidental, it's not even worth mentioning. To Adam, you have no idea, do you? Adam, well, Lucifer, yes? Adam, I'm only guessing, but sometimes it makes me feel. Lucifer, feel what? Adam, well, kinda sporty? One can easily forgive Miller's Miltonesque insertion of the name Lucifer into the myth, given his play's many other merits. Still, I would suggest that directors costume the tempter as a serpent rather than an angel. However accomplished, this would not only keep with Miller's motley of animal sounds and imagery, but would also involve so clumsy and cumbersome a movement as to increase the overall comic effect. And Yahweh? He either doesn't appreciate the comedy of the entire situation or ranks obedience above humor. Neither does he take Adam and Eve's desire to be like him as complimentary. Instead, sensing a threat to his divine autocracy, Yahweh retaliates in extreme, disproportionate fashion, meting out sundry future pains and banishing the couple. The excessive penalties handed down to human and serpent kind hardly portray an authority, least of all a deity, worthy of praise. If proportionality is a hallmark of justice, then here, as elsewhere, Yahweh is wildly unjust. As political experience demonstrates, the worst of rulers choose as their underlings those who have no sense for any difference between good and evil. History overabounds with examples. And the more power one of these sorts of rulers wields, the worse we rightly judge them to be. In prohibiting Adam and Eve from the knowledge of good and evil, and being the most powerful of rulers, Yahweh numbers among the worst of rulers. Those of good faith who deny this do so in bad faith. The myth's ideological proposals are entertaining and ingenious, but only, as happens with all myths, at a cost. The story ultimately depicts a world in which a divine ipse dixit, because I said so, and irrational policy are used to keep humankind in its appointed subordinate place. Is this meant to encourage subservience or to explain the very manner in which authorities typically try to secure it? Both are possible. Furthermore, the foregoing discussion shows how the usual prattle about free will, that momentous and regressive Augustinian blunder that faculty invented ex post facto to preserve and justify the poisonous superstition of original sin, can be seen for what it is, sloppy reading and ham-fisted interpolation. No one can freely choose between good and evil if they have no incorporated inkling thereof. Yahweh chastises Adam and Eve, despite their innocence, with the knowledge and institution of guilt itself. Regarding their attainment of partial moral knowledge, we would do better to describe the pair not as having been created with free will, but borrowing Sartre's adage as condemned to freedom. Thank you for listening to this audio edition of Free Inquiry, the journal for secular humanist ideas. If you enjoyed this article, consider subscribing to Free Inquiry magazine to explore more thought-provoking content on reason, ethics, science, and free thought. You can find more articles, subscribe, or support our work at secularhumanism.org. There you'll also discover resources on secular humanism, information on upcoming events, and ways to connect with a community of like-minded thinkers. If you believe in the importance of reason, free expression, and humanist values, consider making a donation to support our work. Every contribution helps us continue to publish, advocate, and provide resources for a more rational, secular world. Once again, thanks for listening and for supporting free inquiry, free minds, and free expression.